When I was just 7, my parents left me behind without a second thought. They didn't simply walk out of the house, they erased me from their lives as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience they could discard. I can still picture myself, standing on the front porch, clutching my small backpack, waiting for them to come back. They never did. The only person who reached out to me in that moment was my grandmother, Margaret Hale, or Grandma Maggie, as everyone knew her. She pulled me into her arms, whispered that I was safe now, and from that day forward, she became the only real parent I ever knew. For 12 years, she gave me everything my parents had denied me: love, patience, encouragement, and the belief that I mattered. Then, after all those years of silence, something unimaginable happened. On the very day of Grandma Maggie's funeral, the people who had abandoned me reappeared. My mother, Rena, and my father, Caleb, stood outside the church. As if they belonged there, their expressions cold and unreadable. They hadn't come to grieve. They had come to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. You see, Grandma Maggie wasn't just the woman who raised me. She had also left behind an estate worth $75 million. And my parents, who hadn't spoken my name in over a decade, suddenly showed up with their hands outstretched. They demanded her fortune as though it were an inheritance they were entitled to. I thought I had already endured the worst pain a child could feel, but sitting in that lawyer's office, hearing their voices filled with greed and arrogance was almost too much to bear. My father looked at me with a smug grin, convinced he was about to take everything my grandmother had built. My mother crossed her arms and muttered under her breath about how things were finally going to be set right, but then the lawyer opened the envelope. He began to read my grandmother's final words, and in that instant, the atmosphere in the room changed. Every eye turned toward me. My parents' confidence drained away like water from a punctured container. Their faces paled, their jaws clenched. And they realized too late that this story would never end the way they had imagined. When my parents abandoned me at 7 years old, my world shattered in an instant. I was too young to understand why they had made that choice. All I knew was that one morning they were there, and by evening they were gone. The silence in the house was deafening, louder than anything I had ever heard. I wandered through each room, calling for my mother and father, thinking they must be hiding or playing a cruel trick. They never answered. I sat on the front steps until darkness fell, gripping the straps of my backpack, hoping headlights would appear in the driveway. None ever did. It was my grandmother, Margaret Hale, who rescued me from that endless night. She arrived in her old blue station wagon, her eyes blazing with fury when she realized what had happened. She knelt in front of me, her hands warm and steady on my shoulders. "You're coming home with me, Ethan," she said. "I promise you'll never be alone again." In that moment, the fear and confusion that had taken root inside me eased. Just enough for me to breathe. She kept that promise every single day after that. Grandma Maggie wasn't wealthy in the ways most people measure wealth. She lived in a modest house with creaking floors and a kitchen that always smelled of cinnamon and coffee. What she lacked in material riches, she more than made up for in love and strength. She raised me as if I were her own son, filling the void my parents had left behind. She woke me up for school each morning with a gentle knock and a plate of pancakes waiting in the kitchen. She sat in the front row at every school performance, cheering louder than anyone else. When I brought home report cards, she displayed them on the refrigerator like trophies. At night, when the world felt too heavy and I thought too much about why my parents had left, she would sit beside my bed and tell me stories about resilience. She told me how she had worked 3 jobs as a young widow to raise her only son, my father. She said that hardship wasn't meant to break us, but to shape us into people who could withstand life's storms. "You're stronger than you know, Ethan," she would say, brushing my hair back from my forehead. Your past doesn't define you, your choices will. Growing up with her, I never felt like I had less than other kids, even though I often didn't have the newest shoes or the latest toys. What I had was far more valuable: security. I had someone who believed in me, with a fierceness that made me believe in myself. When kids at school asked where my parents were, I used to feel ashamed. But Grandma Maggie told me I should never be embarrassed by the truth. Some people run from responsibility, she said. But I stayed, and so will you. You'll stand tall, Ethan. That's what matters. As I grew older, her influence only deepened. She pushed me to take my education seriously. She celebrated my successes, but also reminded me that failure was nothing to fear. She taught me how to cook family recipes, how to balance a checkbook, and how to treat people with dignity, even when they didn't return the favor. She made me mow the lawn every Saturday morning, not because she cared about the grass, but because she believed work built character. Our relationship wasn't just one of guardian and child. She became my best friend, my confidant, and the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. We laughed together often. She had a playful side and would pull small pranks, like hiding my shoes and pretending she had donated them, only to pull them out from behind the couch while we both burst into laughter. On holidays, she made our house the heart of warmth and community. Neighbors and distant relatives gathered around her table, drawn by her cooking and her ability to make everyone feel welcome. Looking back, I realize how carefully she balanced being both nurturing and firm. She gave me the freedom to make mistakes, but also the guidance to learn from them. She treated me not as a fragile boy broken by abandonment, but as a young man capable of resilience. She never allowed bitterness to poison her spirit, even though her own son, my father, had walked away from me. She rarely spoke his name, but when she did, it was with a mix of sadness and resolve. People show you who they are through their choices, she once said. Caleb made his. But that doesn't mean you have to follow the same path. By the time I reached my teenage years, I had stopped waiting for my parents to return. Their absence became a shadow in the background rather than a wound I carried every day. What defined me instead was the love and guidance Grandma Maggie had poured into my life. She had turned what could have been a story of loss into one of survival and hope. When I think of my childhood now, the first image that comes to mind isn't of an empty house or unanswered questions. It's of sitting at our worn wooden table, eating apple pie fresh from the oven while Grandma Maggie asked me about my dreams for the future. She listened with genuine interest, nodding and smiling, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She believed in me with such conviction that it became impossible not to believe in myself. That was the world she created for me, a world built not on material wealth, but on unconditional love. It was a world that allowed me to grow, to heal, and to become the person I am today. Didn't know then how much she had quietly built behind the scenes, or how her legacy would one day ignite a storm that would shake the foundations of my family. All I knew was that she had given me everything my parents refused to give: a home, a future, and a reason to keep moving forward. The day of Grandma Maggie's funeral was one of the hardest days of my life. The morning air felt heavy, as if the world itself understood the weight of my loss. I stood outside the church in a black suit that felt too stiff, my hands trembling as I greeted neighbors, old family friends, and people who had known her for decades. The church smelled of lilac, and their sweetness made my stomach twist. Every face I saw carried sorrow, but it was a sorrow softened by respect. People spoke about how much Maggie had done for them, how she had opened her home and heart when they had nowhere else to go. I wanted to stay strong, but the truth was, I was broken inside. For 12 years, she had been everything to me. Without her, I felt like that boy again, standing on the porch, waiting for parents who would never return. As I turned to walk, inside I froze. Standing at the edge of the church steps were two faces I hadn't seen since I was a child. My father, Caleb Hale, wore a sleek black suit with a polished watch that caught the sunlight. His jaw was clenched, his hair grayer than I remembered, but his eyes carried the same sharpness that had once made me feel small. Beside him stood my mother, Rena, her lips painted red, her dress expensive, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I was imagining them. I blinked, hoping they would disappear like ghosts, but they stayed, and as they began walking toward me, the pit in my stomach grew. "Ethan," my father said, his voice flat, as if we were strangers meeting by chance. I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. My mother placed a hand on my father's arm, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You've grown," she said. Her tone was clipped, almost annoyed, as though it was inconvenient that time had passed without her. Anger surged through me, but grief weighed heavier. This wasn't their day. It wasn't about them. I turned without answering and walked inside. The church. Throughout the service, I felt their presence behind me. While I wept during the eulogy, they sat stiff and cold, not a tear shed, not a hand raised in prayer. They looked like actors forced into a role they had no interest in playing. The congregation noticed. Whispers rippled through the pews. People remembered how they had left. Their return now wasn't seen as a gesture of mourning, but as an insult. After the burial, while friends gathered around me to offer comfort, Caleb and Rena stood off to the side, speaking in hushed tones. I avoided them, but the truth came crashing in when the lawyer approached me later that afternoon. Mr. Grant, a tall man with silver hair and a solemn expression, asked me to meet him in his office that evening for the reading of the will. He explained it was Maggie's request, that it be done quickly. I agreed, though my heart ached at the thought. When I arrived, my parents were already there, seated across from one another with rigid postures. Caleb glanced at his watch impatiently. Rena tapped her manicured nails against the wooden arm of her chair. I sat down opposite them, forcing myself to hold my head high. Mr. Grant entered, carrying a leather folder. He greeted me warmly, then turned his gaze to my parents. His expression was polite but distant. "We are here today to honor the final wishes of Margaret Hale," he said. My father leaned back, crossing his arms. "Let's get on with it," he said, his tone dismissive. Rena added, "Yes, we all know she had considerable assets. It's only right. They returned to the family." Her words stung, and I could no longer stay silent. Return to the family? She was my family. Where were you when I was a boy crying myself to sleep? Where were you when I needed someone to stand at my school concerts? You abandoned us both. Caleb narrowed his eyes. "Watch your tone. You're still our son." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I stopped being your son the day you walked away." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears as Mr. Grant adjusted his glasses and prepared to read. My parents leaned forward, anticipation written across their faces, convinced that wealth was about to fall into their hands. For me, the moment wasn't about money. It was about justice. It was about hearing the last words of the woman who had given me everything. As Mr. Grant carefully opened the envelope, I closed my eyes for a second and pictured Maggie's face. I remembered her laughter, her warmth, and her determination. I remembered her telling me that real power comes from integrity, not greed. That thought gave me strength. I opened my eyes again, ready for whatever words would follow. My father broke the silence with a low chuckle. "This is going to be simpler than you think, Ethan. You'll see. She was still my mother. No matter what stories she fed you, blood matters." I met his gaze without blinking. "Blood matters when you honor it. You didn't." The color rose in his cheeks, but he said nothing. For the first time, I felt like the balance of power in the room had shifted. Mr. Grant placed the open document on the table. He glanced at me first, offering the smallest nod, then began reading the opening lines. My parents straightened in their seats, ready to receive the fortune they believed belonged to them. In that moment, I made a silent decision. No matter what the will contained, I would live in a way that honored Maggie's values. I would not let greed poison me the way it had consumed my parents. If the estate came to me, I would protect it. Not for my own comfort, but as a continuation of her legacy. If somehow it went to them, I would still walk out with my dignity intact. The choice had already been made in my heart. I would not fight with anger or desperation. I would stand with the quiet strength she had taught me. This moment was no longer about money. It was about respect, about truth, about the bond between a grandmother and the boy she raised into a man. The lawyer's voice carried through the room as he reached the most crucial part of the document. My parents' expressions were eager, filled with greed. Mine was steady, anchored by the memory of Maggie's unwavering love. Whatever was about to happen, I was ready to face it. Mr. Grant's voice filled the room as he began to read my grandmother's final will. The sound of his measured tone carried a weight that made every second feel longer than it was. My father leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, a confident smile tugging at his lips. My mother folded her arms tightly across her chest, her chin lifted as though she were preparing to receive a crown. I sat still, my hands clasped in my lap, my heart pounding, but my resolve unshaken. To my beloved grandson Ethan Hale, Mr. Grant began, "You have been the greatest joy of my life. From the moment you came into my care, you became the son I never thought I would have again. Every sacrifice I made for you, and I have never regretted a single moment. My only wish in this world was to see you grow into the man you are today. For that reason, I leave my entire estate, valued at $75 million, solely and unconditionally to you." The room seemed to freeze. My breath caught in my throat. I felt my father's eyes burning into me, his earlier confidence dissolving into disbelief. My mother's mouth dropped open, her perfectly painted lips parting as though she had forgotten how to breathe. Mr. Grant continued without hesitation. "To my son Caleb and his wife Rena, who chose to abandon Ethan when he needed you most, I leave $1 each. This is not an oversight, nor is it cruelty. It is a reminder that true wealth is not found in money but in the love and responsibility you chose to throw away. My hope is that one day you understand that your actions cost you far more than any inheritance ever could." A stunned silence filled the office. My father's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. His jaw tightened, and he slammed his fist against the table so hard that the documents rattled. "This is a joke," he barked. "She had no right to do this. I am her son. This money should be mine." Mr. Grant looked at him calmly. "Mr. Hale, this will is legally binding. Your mother was of sound mind, and these were her explicit wishes. There is no mistake. My mother's—" Composure cracked. She shot up from her chair, her voice shrill. "After everything we gave her, this is how she repays us? After all those years, she chooses him over her own blood?" I stood slowly, my legs trembling, but I kept my voice steady. "She chose me because I was here. She chose me because I loved her and stayed by her side when you walked away. You abandoned both of us, and you don't get to rewrite history just because there's money involved now." My father glared at me, his teeth clenched. "You think you deserve this? You're just a kid. You wouldn't know what to do with that kind of money. We should be the ones to manage it, not you." I met his gaze directly, refusing to look away. "I don't need you to manage anything. Maggie trusted me, and that is all that matters. She knew me better than anyone. She knew what I would do with her legacy, and she wanted no part of it in your hands." The room grew tense again. the air thick with their rage and my defiance. Mr. Grant shuffled the papers back into the folder and said firmly, "This concludes the reading of the will. Any attempt to contest it will be futile. The documents have been carefully prepared to withstand challenge." Margaret was very clear in her intentions. My father stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He pointed a finger at me, his face twisted with anger. "This isn't over, Ethan. You'll regret this. We'll make sure of it." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I refused to back down. "No," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "It is over. You had your chance to be my parents, and you threw it away. Maggie gave me everything you never could. You don't get to take that from me now." My mother's face went pale, and she sank back into her chair. For the first time, her confidence cracked into something closer to shame. Though whether it was for her actions or simply for losing the inheritance, I couldn't tell. She looked at me with eyes that held no warmth, only bitterness. As they gathered their things, the reality of what had happened settled in. Their power over me had vanished. For years I had carried the weight of their abandonment, wondering if I had done something wrong, if I had somehow driven them away. Now, watching them storm out of the office, I realized the truth. Their absence had never been about me. It had always been about them, their selfishness, their greed, their refusal to put anyone else above themselves. Mr. Grant placed a hand on my shoulder before I left. "Your grandmother believed in you, Ethan. She wanted to make sure you had not only security, but the freedom to build a life on your own terms. She was proud of you. You should remember that above all else." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Tears stung my eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of knowing she had seen me, valued me, and protected me even in her final act. Walking out of that office, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and strength. I had lost the most important person in my life, but I had gained the clarity she wanted me to have. My parents had shown their true faces, and Maggie had left me with more than wealth. She had left me with the undeniable proof that love was stronger than betrayal, and that integrity was worth more than money. When I left the lawyer's office that evening, the world outside felt different. The air was cool, the sun was setting, and the streets glowed with the amber light of dusk. My parents had stormed off in anger, their voices echoing faintly down the hallway as they argued with each other. For the first time in my life, their presence no longer held power over me. They could shout, threaten, or scheme, but the truth had already been spoken. Grandma Maggie had seen through their selfishness and protected me even in death. I walked to my car slowly, letting the events settle in my mind. Grief still sat heavy in my chest. I wanted nothing more than to hear Maggie's voice again, to feel her warm hand on mine, to sit in our kitchen while she told me everything was going to be all right. She was gone, and no amount of money or legal documents could change that. What she left me, however, was more than financial security. She left me with proof that love matters more than blood, and that the choices we make define who we are far more than the titles we carry. That night, I returned to her house. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I walked through each room, tracing my fingers over the familiar furniture, the photographs on the walls, and the worn wooden banister she used to grip as she climbed the stairs. Every corner of the house carried her spirit. The smell of cinnamon still lingered faintly in the kitchen. Her knitting needles rested in a basket by the couch, as if she had only stepped away for a moment. I sat at the table where we had shared countless meals, and thought about what to do next. $75 million was a staggering amount. Most people would see it as an opportunity to live in luxury, to buy houses, cars, and vacations. But I knew that wasn't what Maggie wanted. She had never been a woman who cared about wealth for its own sake. She valued community, kindness, and the chance to make life better for others. If she had trusted me with this fortune, then I had a responsibility to carry those values forward. The next morning, I contacted Mr. Grant again. I told him I wanted to set aside a portion of the estate to create a scholarship fund in Maggie's name. I wanted children who grew up without parents, children who felt abandoned or forgotten, to have a chance to pursue education and build futures they deserved. I told him I also wanted to donate to local charities, especially the shelters and food banks Maggie had supported quietly for years. She had always said that if you have enough to share, you should never keep it all to yourself. As I made these decisions, I felt lighter. I realized I wasn't just managing money. I was shaping a legacy that would outlast me. Every dollar used to lift someone else would be another piece of Maggie living on in the world. That thought gave me peace. My parents tried contacting me in the weeks that followed. Letters arrived, some begging, some threatening. They called me ungrateful, said I was turning my back on them. But I had learned enough to recognize their words for what they were: attempts to manipulate me back into a role I no longer played. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't respond to their letters. The boy who once waited on the porch for them was gone. In his place stood a man who knew the difference between family and strangers. The community, however, rallied around me. Neighbors came to the house with casseroles and flowers, not because I was wealthy now, but because they loved Maggie and wanted to honor her. They told me stories I had never heard. How she had paid for a neighbor's medicine when they were short on money. How she had tutored kids in math after school. How she had volunteered quietly at the church food drive every holiday season. With every story, I realized just how deep her impact had been. She had left her mark not with money, but with love and action. One evening, I sat on the porch where my childhood had begun in heartbreak and ended in resilience. I looked up at the stars and thought about Maggie. I whispered a thank you into the night, hoping somehow she could hear me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for teaching me what love really means. Thank you for protecting me even now. In the end, the lesson was clear. Wealth can disappear, but character endures. My parents believed money would give them power. But what they failed to understand was that real power comes from love, responsibility, and integrity. Maggie's final act hadn't been about punishing them. It had been about protecting me and ensuring I would carry her values forward. I still grieve her absence. I still miss her every day. But I walk with my head high because I know I am not walking alone. Her love walks with me. Her lessons guide me. And her legacy now stretches far beyond our family, reaching every life touched by the choices I make. In her name, that is the story of how I lost the woman who raised me and how even in her death she gave me the greatest gift of all. The strength to stand on my own, the wisdom to value love over greed, and the courage to build a future that honors her name. That is my story. It's not just about losing my grandmother or facing parents who only returned when money was involved. It's about discovering where true family lies, about realizing that love is stronger than greed, and about carrying forward the legacy of the one person who never gave up on me.